85% of what we worry about, the outcome's actually far more positive than as we were worrying about it. And that worry is absolutely wasted. So if we don't learn to manage our emotions will be in dominion over us.
Life has challenges and difficult things, but let's not waste time on things that we can't control. Dr. John is a psychologist who coaches men to greater success and happiness and is a podcast host of Evolved Caveman.
We spend too much time in the negative past, which is regret, depression, shame, guilt, and we spend too much time in the negative future, which is all about anxiety, stress, worry, and dread. And so if we don't get a better handle on our emotions and how to manage them, we are at their mercy.
Like having the emotions not the problem. What are we doing with the emotion that's the problem?
You can feel whatever you're feeling, but you cannot.
And it's time for a little pop quiz interruption. I'd like you please to guess, what is the percentage of people who are watching the content on this channel who have not subscribed? Are you ready? 97.5% have not subscribed. What? This blew my mind. That means only 2.5% of you have subscribed. Please help me change that. This makes a drastic impact on my capacity to continue sharing this educational content at no cost to you. All you have to do is press that subscribe button. If you have, thank you so much. Please continue sharing it with anyone you think can benefit from this. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Kasim Al-Mashat. I am so excited to share today's conversation with Dr. John Schinnerer. Dr. John coaches men to greater success and happiness at work and at home. His area of expertise include high performance, stress management, man box culture, which I'm so excited to learn more about, positive psychology, anger management, and creating thriving relationships. And he also has a course about anger management and forgiveness. We need more of that in the world. And it's on simple habit that's been listened to over 200,000 times. By the way, over 20,000 people have taken his online anger management course. Dr. John recently received awards for Best Executive Coach and for leadership in healthcare. He also hosts the Evolved Caveman podcast, to coach listeners to find success and happiness. So you can visit theevolvedcaveman.com to learn more about the podcast or guide2self.com for info about his work with men. But first, Dr. John, warm welcome to you to the Pause to Elevate podcast.
Thank you so much, Kasim. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. You've done so much, so many things, incredible, deep work. So I want to begin with this quote that you have on your website that I loved, and I had to read it. Like it's actually so simple, but I find it really captures so much. So let me just share it with listeners. And you say the goal of life is to be successful and happy at work and home. I love the capitalizing the and. Short of this, there's neither success nor happiness. So, what was your journey in finding happiness and success at work and at home?
Well, thank you for the question. And it started when I was, well, it started before, but it really hit me when I was 17. And my parents were overachievers, highly accomplished, hard driving. And so I think I internalized the lesson that to get their love and attention, I needed to do the same. And I learned how to push myself to excess in high school. And so by senior year in high school, I'm sure from the outside, it looked like I was crushing it. You know, I was student body president. I was captain of 3 varsity teams.
Oh,
I was taking advanced classes. I was involved in clubs and activities. Like, you know, for all intents and purposes, that was success. And my internal experience, however, was much different. I found I was tired, exhausted all the time. I was stressed. I was anxious. I was depressed some of the time. And it really made me start questioning, where is there room in this idea of success for things like positive emotions, happiness, pride, awe, curiosity, contentment, relaxation. And so I didn't have any answers at 17, but it started me questioning. And, you know, it worked. I got into a great college and then eventually went to UC Berkeley to get a PhD in psychology. And I went into Berkeley really with the idea of learning more about emotions because
Mm.
I'd always been a, pretty smart kid, but the dumbest, most shameful, embarrassing stuff I had done in my life really happened when my emotional mind was in charge of me.
Ah.
And so it really started me like, I need to manage these things better. And that just led on a 40-year path
Mm.
to learning more about what does really drive us, what does drive thoughts, what does drive action. I majored. My area of emphasis at Cal was moral development.
Ah.
And I remember there was a theory by Lawrence Kohlberg that I fell in love with from Harvard. And it was a theory of moral development. And it was, these 5 stages of cognitive development that we go through. So it was about how we think about morality. And it was beautifully laid out. Like it was awesome.
Mm.
And I remember going to my advisor, Elliot Turiel, who studied under Kohlberg, and I told him I wanted to write, my first thesis on this. And he was like, well, the theory doesn't predict action very well at
Ah,
all. And I was like, oh, you're kidding.
that's a disappointment.
So this beautiful theory that, if it doesn't predict how we behave in moral situations, what good is it? And so that really kind of forced me to look at emotion. And I agree with Antonio Damasio, one of the foremost neuroscientists in the world, that we are not thinking beings that feel. We are feeling beings that think. In other words, emotion is primary. It's more core to us. It's faster. It's more powerful. And emotion is intertwined with everything that we say, think, and do. And so
Mm.
if we don't get a better handle on our emotions and how to manage them, we are at their mercy.
Mm.
And Philippe Golden, he was at Stanford. I know this is a little bit dated, but he had a quote saying, "Emotional management is the key to a happy life." And I was like, "Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me."
Mm. See, you're just beginning to address a big question I have, and you're already beginning to unpack it, which is why do emotions matter?
Um, well, I think everyone's had that experience, right, of getting angry and saying something they didn't mean or doing
Mm.
something they didn't want to do, and then you kind of emerge from this emotional state, and then you have regret, and then you have shame, and then you have guilt, and then you go in this downward negative emotional and thought spiral where you're just beating yourself up over what happened. And same thing for sadness, depression, same thing for anxiety, fear, same thing for guilt and shame. Like they can all lead us to do things that
Mhm.
we're not proud of. And really it's so important because one of the ways that we're socialized as men, and we can get into the man box more, but I think that we are socialized to cut ourselves off from the vast majority of positive emotions available
Mm.
to us. It's a third of our emotional spectrum, which essentially cuts us off from, I will say, any possibility of happiness, because
Mm.
positive emotions are a big part of a happier life, along with positive relationships and meaning and purpose. And then on the flip side, we get too bogged down in our negative or uncomfortable emotions.
Mm.
And we spend too much time in the negative past, which is regret, depression,
Yeah.
shame, guilt. And we spend too much time in the negative future, which is all about anxiety, stress, worry, and dread.
Like what can go
And
bad and worry about the
yeah,
future. Yeah.
they're just negative outcomes that we are afraid will happen. We have this kind of magical thinking belief that by thinking about it, we're going to prevent it from happening, which is,
Mm.
doesn't really happen.
That'll be
And
amazing,
so,
by the way, if that does happen.
yeah, wouldn't it?
Like that,
Eh,
like, I think both of us would be out of a job if we go, you know what?
For sure.
Just think about all the bad things and they won't happen.
Yeah.
They'll be
Yeah.
resolved.
And
Yeah,
poof, they're
that'll be
gone.
great.
Well, there was a study a while back that showed that 85% of what we worry about, the outcome's actually far more positive than as we were worrying about it. So 85% of the time, that worry is absolutely wasted.
Yes.
And I would say in my personal experience, it's more like 90%. Like it's huge. And so I try to remind myself of that to interrupt that worry cycle when I'm in the
Mm,
midst of it. Like this worry isn't really doing me any good. And I,
yeah.
I think there is, I want to allow myself to plan for things, to plan for worst case scenario, but I don't want to spend a lot of time there.
Mm,
And I think the majority of us get stuck there in many cases.
yeah.
And so if we don't learn to manage our emotions will be in dominion over us. And same thing with thought, right? I
Mm,
think thought is a great employee and a terrible boss. I want to be in charge of my thoughts. I don't want my thoughts in charge of me. And everyone that's hearing this should know the difference when your
Mm,
thoughts are in charge of you, running away with you, like 2 a.m. in the morning, you wake up and
mhm.
your mind just starts going. And you know all about this, having taught mindfulness and MBSR. I mean, that's
Yeah.
right up your alley.
How quickly? Because, when a thought comes up, we often just go with it. Like it takes us. Like there isn't enough space to go, okay, if this is a thought, wait a minute,
Yeah.
and then we indulge in it. When you're sharing about this worry, I don't know, I remember this quote. I think it was Mark Twain. He said something like, I've experienced many tragedies in my life. Some of
Yes.
them actually happened. Do you know what I mean?
Mark
Like,
Twain was brilliant.
but it's not brilliant because we do experience bad things. And none of the work that you're saying is like, oh, everything's rosy. No, life has challenges and difficult things, but let's not waste time on things that you know we can't control.
I will see your Mark Twain quote and raise you a Mark Twain quote,
Oh, perfect. Let's do it.
because one of the things that I talk to men a lot about is sort of this idea of, where did your playfulness go? Where did
Mm,
your sense of laughter go? Where did your smile go? And I'm a big fan of humor. And my family all knows this, my clients all know this. Mark Twain said, humor or comedy is tragedy plus time.
mm.
And I shortened it to, comedy is tragedy plus 30 seconds. And where 30 seconds is really any length of time. But I mean, it's funny because, recently I lost my vision in Portugal. I lost the use of my left eye. I went
Mm,
completely blind, like over a 4-hour period. And I'm
mm,
trying to deal with that. And Jory, my partner, after about 2 hours, tried to make a joke.
mm.
And I was like, hey, honey, it hasn't been 30 seconds yet. In other words, I'm not quite there yet.
You're
I'm,
not
I'm
there.
trying to catch
It's just
up, but I'm
yeah,
not there
yeah,
yet.
yeah, yeah.
So it's great code for that as well. Because
Yeah.
it also emphasizes the importance of humor in our family, and that we're always trying
Mm.
to keep things in perspective and to be able to laugh at things. It's not always possible, but I think it's a really healthy goal.
But also to have the trust with your partner, so Jory,
Hmm.
that she's supporting you and not trying to put you down. Like there's an
Hmm.
understanding of like the humor wasn't to put you down. And sometimes humor can be misunderstood as making fun of someone or putting someone down, and you're saying
Well, sometimes
actually
it is actually a put down or
yeah, yeah.
deprecate, or yeah,
But it's
an
like you're
attack.
saying it can be really helpful in helping each other bring lightheartedness, and because we can't take things really seriously. Like life can get really serious.
Yeah, and I think
You
it
know.
gets back to this idea of, the autonomic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system, which is the stress response, fight, flight, freeze, and the parasympathetic nervous system, which
Mm,
is rest and digest.
right.
And in this day and age, we're so good at keeping that stress response locked in the on position. And, I remember, I guess it was about 20 years ago, one of the big questions evolutionarily we had is, what's the purpose of positive emotions? Like,
Mm,
why would evolution select them to continue in our species? And Barbara Fredrickson came up with a great theory called broaden and build, and then proved it, I think, for the most part, which says that
mm,
positive emotions broaden the actions available to us. They broaden the thought processes available to us,
mm.
but they also fill us with enduring resources. They kind of fill up that bucket of positive emotions in us that we
Ah,
can use to support loved ones. Plus, they act as a hidden reset button for the physiological effects of negative emotions.
mm,
So, anger will up your heart rate, dump cortisol in the blood
mhm.
system, increase muscle tension. Laughter will undo all that,
Yeah.
for example.
Mm. It's interesting, as you're sharing this, we do have a bias, like we can have a positive emotion, but then move on, and then there's something negative happens, or we have a negative emotion, and then we hang on to that.
Yes, the negativity bias.
Yeah, we just
Yeah,
keep
it's
hanging
and
on.
and they say that's about 4 or 5 times as powerful as the positive. And I like Rick Hanson's line that our minds are like Velcro for the bad and
Yeah,
Teflon for the good, right? So the good just slips right out, but the
yeah,
bad shit just hangs right on in
it
your
just
mind if you're
hangs
over
on.
focused
Yeah,
on it. And that was effective hundreds of thousands of years ago when we
yeah,
lived in tribes. It kept us alive, but there's not that many life-threatening situations that we're dealing with in this day and age.
right.
So, we'll react to, I don't know, being late on a project, or being late to pick up our child,
Yeah,
or, getting a poor grade on a test, as
mm,
if it's life threatening when it's
mm,
not.
right. So the emotional brain kind of kicks in, and
Hmm.
you speak about in Guide to Self, emotional gas tank,
Hmm.
emotional gas. So what is this emotional gas tank?
Well, one of the things I talk about with clients, actually, I haven't talked about this in a while, but I I used to think that we had one sort of like bucket or gas tank in us,
Mm,
right? And then it just kind of all the emotions metaphorically were stored there. And then there was research that showed that that wasn't quite correct. That actually it's more appropriate to think of it as having us as having two tanks or
mm,
buckets, one for the negative, uncomfortable emotions, one for the positive stuff. And I like that idea. If you think about those buckets on a 1 to 10 scale, with one being completely empty, 10 being completely full,
uh-huh.
because we tend to overfocus on the bucket of negative emotions.
Mm,
And, we worry about our buckets too filled with anger, resentment, grudges, sadness, anxiety, stress, worry. And I do think that, there's that gradual accumulation of negative experiences and negative emotions. And when we get to like an 8 or a 9, really easy for that to overflow. Then you go
mm.
volcanic, and usually you end up, spewing anger on someone you love, wrong time, wrong degree, wrong
Right.
person. It's all wrong, right? And so one of the tasks is really, how do you empty out that bucket of negative emotions on the regular? The other
Mm,
task is, how do you mindfully fill up that bucket of positive emotions so that you have resources to tap into when things get difficult. And then my belief also is that you kind of need to drain that bucket of positive emotions before you can actually lose your lid on the bucket of negative emotions. And then also consider, if you want to
mm.
extend that, that I
Yeah.
believe we have these same buckets that are context or relationship specific. So
Mm,
for instance, I have two buckets with you.
mm.
I have two buckets with Jory. I have two buckets with my
Ah.
mom, and they're all slightly different based on past experience and, how much resentment we're holding on to, or how good of a time
Mm,
we've had lately, or how connected we feel. And so it explains why we can go into a conversation with someone that we love and be able to lose our temper quite easily, because
mm.
our bucket of negative emotions is at an 8 or a 9, the bucket of positive emotions is almost depleted. Really easy to go into that conversation and get triggered if you're not aware.
What a beautiful description of this, the two buckets, and also context. So having two buckets, positive and negative emotion, but it can be different based on who we're dealing with.
Mhm.
So with some people, the negative is much higher. So very relational.
Mhm.
Like you're describing this, so emotion is not a fixed thing. We just have this much sadness and this much positive. It's up and down, and I guess this is one of the things that many people are not connected to. Like things do shift, and then they're not even connected. And I noticed that when teaching mindfulness, like emotion, like, oh, like they can come and go, and they go on their own.
Yeah.
So yeah, how do you work with that, with all the different clients you work? So what, this
Well, it
emotions.
depends what they present with, but
Mm,
I mean, so I've done a lot of anger management work.
yeah.
So a lot of that is about kind of, how do you dump out the bucket of negative emotions, primarily anger. And I think,
Mhm.
there's a bunch of tools to do that. One of my favorites is daily forgiveness, a la Fred Luskin. And, I think the biggest barrier that we have to forgiving other people for wronging us or offending us or hurting us is the belief that, let's say you wrong me,
Mm.
and I'm thinking, well, if I forgive Kasem, then I'm approving of how he behaved. I'm condoning it. I'm saying it's
Right.
okay. And that's not the case at all.
Mm.
It doesn't mean you approve of what happened to you. It's simply the best way I know of to get rid of old stale anger, which I believe we all sit on because we're human, and no one
Yeah.
really teaches us effective ways of getting rid of it. The other barrier there is confusing a unforgivable act with an unwillingness to forgive. So when I
Mm.
first read that, I was like, wait, what? So let me unpack that a little
Please,
bit. So
yeah.
basically, Fred did work. So he reconceptualized forgiveness, broke it down in terms of steps. He got a great book called Forgive for Good.
Mm.
And he went to Ireland and worked with parents in large cities there that had lost children to bombings. And he went to inner cities here in the US and worked with parents who had lost children to gang violence.
Mm.
And he taught them to forgive the murderers of their children.
Wow.
Now, it doesn't get a whole lot worse than that,
Yeah.
which I really appreciate Fred doing because it gave me perspective. Like, if they can do that, there's a lot of lesser stuff in my life that I
Right.
can forgive.
Right.
But the idea there is it would be really easy for those parents to think, I can't forgive that. That's
Mm.
unforgivable. They took my child. Now, that's an unwillingness to forgive.
Mm.
But what we do is we say that's an unforgivable act.
Right.
And that's not true. There's nothing that is unforgivable.
Mm.
We just are unwilling to forgive it. But the list, there's a laundry list of health benefits and psychological benefits that came from this work. I mean, less anger, less stress, less anxiety, more frequent positive emotions, better physical health.
Mm.
I mean, the list just went on and on and on as a result of practicing forgiveness on the daily.
Mm. It's such a burden we carry, this resentment or unwilling to forgive. But I guess somehow it has some power and maybe false power that if I can stay angry and not forgive, I'm you know I'm stronger.
Well, back to this idea of magical thinking,
Yeah.
right? That I think we magically think that if I hold on to my anger at this person, I'm going to make them pay.
Yeah.
When in truth, most times they don't even know. Sometimes they don't care. Like, think of a
Mm.
rapist, right? I don't
Yeah.
know that he's going to be beset by guilt and remorse if
Right.
he's sociopathic. Um, and then if you know them, if you come into contact with them, then we are, terse and rude and abrupt. But that just makes us come off as, I don't know, inconsiderate, mean. And the person that's receiving that doesn't probably know why you're doing what you're doing.
Mm.
And so again, I think we have a lot of magical thinking that we're not really aware of, even as adults.
Mm. Yeah. We just do it habitually, like
Uh-huh.
as protect. What do you find is underneath anger for many people? Because often anger is
Oh
more
boy.
on a surface type of emotion that's like at the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, I think, anger has often, I've had people in my office suite say, well, anger's only a secondary emotion.
Mm,
I'm like, yeah, I don't know that anger's only a secondary emotion. I
mm,
think it is often a secondary emotion. I think that there's times when anger is appropriate and
mhm.
necessary. I think the message that anger is often trying to tell us is someone's mistreating us or someone's
Yeah.
crossed a boundary that we need to address, and that's healthy. Anger can also come up in terms of social injustice, which is
Mm,
is necessary and needed. And the question is, how do you deal with the anger once it arises?
right.
But underneath anger is typically more vulnerable emotions. And the one that I've seen the most for me is someone just hurt my feelings.
Mm,
And then it quickly flips to anger. And by quickly, I mean a third of a second. And so a
mm,
lot of times we're not even aware that there's another emotion underlying the anger. But, in men in particular, I've seen anxiety flip to anger. I've seen guilt and shame flip to anger. I've seen
ah,
embarrassment flip to anger. And we know that sadness and depression show up as irritability in men.
mm,
And so it's almost every major negative or uncomfortable emotion that can show up as anger. And that's partly due to the way we're socialized, I would argue.
mm. So it's more
It's safe.
accessible to communicate it, to express it than like I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling
Yeah.
sad.
It's anger is most men's signature or primary emotion,
Mm,
which means that it's the emotion we are most accustomed to, it's easiest to tap into, and it arises most often.
mhm.
It's our go-to emotion.
Yeah. I like how you're saying it too as well because it's more as information. So anger is giving us information, like any emotion is providing information. It's what are we doing with the emotion that's the problem. Like having the
Right.
emotion is not the problem. Getting angry about
Right.
something, it's okay. But then, are we yelling at someone? Are we throwing a chair at someone? Or are we punching
Right.
someone?
Yeah,
Then,
and I mean,
then
you and I and everyone listening, everyone out there is allowed and entitled to feel whatever they're feeling. But that's
Mm,
different from how you behave once the emotion arises.
right.
And that's really, and you know this from mindfulness, but
Mm,
that's really the crux of the issue is you can feel whatever you're feeling.
Mm.
but you cannot behave however you want based on the emotion. And most times what I see with clients is they fuse those two things together, emotion
Mm.
and action.
Mm.
And they aren't even aware that there's a difference. And it goes
Right.
back to that Viktor Frankl quote, right?
Yeah.
There's a gap between stimulus and response, and in
Mm.
that gap lies freedom
Yeah.
or the power to choose.
Mm.
And what we're trying to do is expand that gap, make that longer and longer in terms of duration and time.
Mm. Because we all have habitual ways of being with things. So, anger
Hmm.
might be the go-to, or we may say certain things, and it does require a lot of thinking. And right, that's what you're
It's
talking about.
pre-thought,
Yeah, yeah.
I would argue,
It's
because
book
again,
just
back to that original idea,
yeah,
right? That we are emotional beings that think.
yeah.
So the emotion is more powerful and faster than our thought.
Mm.
And in those intense emotions, they precede thought, I would argue.
Hmm. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to quickly thank you for stopping by and watching this content. It truly means the world to me that you're interested in creating positive change. I also want to invite you to join our amazing community. I have free events online about mindfulness, mindfulness based stress reduction, laughter, as well as retreats that you can do from the comfort of your own home. And are you ready for this? Self paced program that you can do about mindfulness and stress reduction. So you can join the newsletter below to stay up to date on all these goodies. And if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and press that button. It really helps me to keep this content going and reach out to more guests. Thank you so much again, and may you continue enjoying watching this episode. They precede thought, they just happen, they come and go. There's positive, there's negative. One of the emotions that I wanted to ask you about that seems a lot of people struggle with is loneliness.
Ooh, yeah.
Loneliness, whether someone is single or not single, in a relationship, or
Ooh, that's
it's
the
like,
worst kind, I would say, being lonely in a relationship. That's
yeah,
brutal.
yeah, all forms of loneliness.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, well, we know that there's an epidemic of loneliness going
Yeah.
on right now, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. Again, I one of the reasons I would say is how we're socialized as men, for men in particular, the man box. I think that the rise of cell phones and electronics, the rise of social media, I think much of that makes it so that we experience something difficult in a relationship or even with an acquaintance, let's say at high school, right?
Mm.
That I get rejected by a girl, or I get teased, or I get bullied,
Hmm.
um, or I get made fun of, and I get hurt. And so I withdraw. And if that accumulates, if those accumulate enough, I can change my primal belief about people in general, that
Hmm.
for instance, people are dangerous, people will hurt me, people can't be trusted. And then I withdraw to my bedroom and I start going down rabbit holes on the internet. And
Mm.
that's what I've seen with a lot of adolescents, that we get hurt and then we withdraw and then we
Uh-huh.
isolate, and then we fall into these rabbit holes that affect how we think and perceive even more significantly.
Hmm. As you're naming it, I got this visual of loneliness being a byproduct of an unhelpful coping of withdrawing. So we deal with things by withdrawing. Zhup. So it's like
Hmm.
there's a contraction, and that contraction is gonna,
Self-protection.
yeah, that protection is gonna lead us feeling alone, lonely.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, we're trying to cope to the best of our ability, and sometimes not helpful, and ends up
Yeah.
being
And
loneliness.
I think, one of the things that I'll talk about frequently is I think one of the fundamental goals in this lifetime is to open yourself up to love, to open yourself up to friendship, knowing full well that you're almost inevitably going to be hurt.
Hmm.
Disappointment, misunderstanding, maybe someone hurts you intentionally, a breakup, a death, a loss. Like, you inevitably will be hurt.
Yeah.
And after the hurt, if you're hurt enough, you close up and
Yeah.
you wall off and you self-protect and you might withdraw and isolate. Okay, fair enough. And the goal is to open up again as soon as you can. That's resiliency. That's
Mm.
love. That's the path to happiness. And you can just put that cycle on repeat, because I've seen too many people that attempt love or friendship or connection once, twice, three times and get hurt. And at some level, they're like, screw it. I'm not doing that again.
Mm.
I'm just going to stay in my bedroom, or stay in my house or stay in my condo.
This is a very powerful statement you made about what resilience is. And can you say a little more about that? The contraction that happens in hurt and disappointment that makes us close down and then choosing to open up again rather than going to see, you can't trust anyone.
Hmm.
Here's a belief. I can't trust when people hurt you, so safer to be shut down. But you describe resilience beautifully.
Thanks. Well, I think resiliency to me is the ability to bounce back from negative, difficult, uncomfortable emotions.
Mm,
And the challenge is how quickly can I bounce back? How quickly can I bounce back and re-engage with life and with people and with positive emotions and with love? And
mm.
I can give you an example. My 23-year-old son died 17
Oh
months ago,
wow.
and it was a fentanyl overdose. It was
Oh,
out
I'm
of the
so sorry. I
blue.
didn't know that.
It destroyed our family for a couple of months, and there's a whole bunch of stories wrapped up in that. But
Mm,
I didn't want to approach this as a typical male would.
mm.
I resolved that I was going to go after the grief. I was going to feel it. I wasn't going to run from it. I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to numb
Wow.
it. I was going to sob. And I was, at home, 100% parent to my 17-year-old daughter. So had to shepherd her through her grief as well.
Wow.
Um, I told her that, look, shame hides in the shadows or thrives in the shadows, and that we've got to talk about this because shame doesn't stand up to the light of day. And I knew if I buried it and tried
Mm.
to hide it, it would create shame. And so Jory and I did a podcast on my Unevolved Caveman 2 weeks after his death,
Oh wow.
talking about grief, my experience, what it looks like, what are the emotions involved, how do you get through it, in an
Mm.
effort to give men permission to feel and to grieve. The other thing I did is I talked a lot with my daughter about radical acceptance
Mm.
and how, it's fine to feel it as long as you want. And then at some point, we got to turn the page and start working on radically accepting that this is our new reality.
Yeah.
That to stay stuck in this shouldn't have happened, or how could this have happened, or this isn't fair, is likely to keep us stuck in complicated
Right.
grief. And as a result of that, it was pretty fascinating, because it happened to my daughter right in the middle of her senior year, right in the middle of college
Oh
applications.
wow.
It it rocked us, and she got a chance to speak to her high school, San Ramon High,
Hmm.
where you went for a few months.
Yeah.
And so it was like 6 weeks after the death, and she was in speech and debate. She was quite a good speaker. And
Mm,
one of the faculty asked her, "Hey, would you like to speak to the student body about drug addiction and your brother?"
mm.
And so she came home and talked to me, and I said, "Yeah, I'd absolutely do it
Hmm.
because it puts meaning on the tragedy, and that's
Yes.
one of the ways that we're gonna get past this is finding the meaning in it. What's the purpose? What's the lesson?"
Mm.
We know that's one of the ways you go from post-traumatic stress to post-traumatic growth, for example. And
Meaning
I
making
said,
coping.
"Yeah."
Yeah.
And she she said, I might cry." And I was like, "Yeah, you probably will, and that's okay.
Mm.
It's never been more appropriate."
Yeah.
And so she went and she spoke in front of her whole high school and spoke about her brother who had just died
Oh
6 weeks prior,
wow. What a
and drug
courage.
addiction. And it was funny because the other way we made sense of that is my son's name is Brett, and we decided that Brett was actually doing more good on the other side of the veil than he was while he was alive.
Mm.
And it gave her that opportunity to show exemplary courage, which then translated to a bunch of awards at the end of the year. She got Student of the Year for her high school. She got Student of the Year for State of California in speech and
Mm.
debate.
Oh wow.
And that wouldn't have happened without Brett's death. And
Mm.
while we still miss him every day, there is some good that came of it as well. And
Mm.
I think that's the other thing. And we've been talking about emotions. Is this the realization that we are large enough to hold different, conflicting, sometimes emotions at the same time about any one person or any one event.
Mm.
And to give yourself that permission, like, I'm angry at Brett. I'm in anguish. I'm in grief.
Yeah.
I love Brett.
And missing.
And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I'm proud of him because it feels like he's actually doing some good in death,
Mm.
just as an example.
Mhm. So many emotions through a loss. I mean, that's a tragic loss, and you know what? I so deeply appreciate how you described it. It's very far from what often happens. This kind of toxic positivity I often speak about. It's just like,
Mm,
oh no, no, it's all well, everything is good. It's like, no, this is heart wrenching, and we're making sense of it. And
yeah,
how can we evolve, like the name of your, right, how can we
yeah,
evolve? Is it just happening, and
yeah.
how do we work with this? And that leads to other emotions rather than covering it up, not feeling the grief, not feeling the sadness, the sorrow, the loss, and just covering it up with like a warm positive blanket, and that's not
Well,
helpful.
I think that's one of the ways to a happier life
Yeah.
is by experiencing and allowing all of your emotions, by knowing that they're just human. And most of them are messengers, except for shame. Shame's a little bit messed up. That's a whole nother conversation. I can't find a positive, purpose for shame, but every other one. And so I think, part of it is giving yourself permission to feel all the feelings that you have, looking for
Mm,
the message from them. And then once you've felt them, kind of implement strategies to begin to get out of it sooner rather than stay stuck in it.
mm,
But
yeah.
not, we don't deny, we don't suppress the uncomfortable emotions because that just, you bury that stuff and eventually it's going to come up somewhere, somehow,
Mm,
most likely in an inappropriate and unhelpful way.
mm. See, the unhelpful approach as many people take is like emotions, suck it up, put, I don't need it, waste of time, get to the doing, get to my objective, and that's just a little hurdle in the way. I just gotta shove it down. Like, the old classic, for men, it's like, let's man up,
Suck it up.
suck it up, and somehow that's pervasive.
Mm, yeah. Well, and I think if I can go to the man box
Yes, please.
briefly.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great concept. What is the man box?
So the man box is how
Yeah.
we're socialized. It's the lessons that we learn about what it means to be a quote unquote real man.
Mm,
Research shows it starts really young, 4 or 5, as soon as we get in groups of boys in school, and we police ourselves. It's the influence of social media, of movies, of media, radio, television. Some older males, but not all. Because I've had people say, "Well, my dad wasn't like that." Well,
mm,
okay, but you had friends that were like that. You
right.
watched movies with Art Schwarzenegger and Statham, and our action heroes that had the emotional range of a gnat. Um, and and by the way, I love those movies, right? Like I love them, but realize the messages that they're sending.
Yeah.
And so the rules are things like, and there's some good and some bad in here. Be the provider, don't back down, compete, be aggressive, don't ask for help, be self-reliant, dominate
Right.
women, depending how far you want to go with it. Um, be stoic or don't feel.
Mm,
And I think we kind of accept these without any mindfulness, without awareness of the nuance that we can put
mm,
into these spectrums. Each one of them is a spectrum. For example,
right.
self-reliance, think of it on a 1 to 10 scale. 1 is I'm completely reliant on other people for everything. I don't want to be that.
Hmm.
But a 10 is I'm 100% self-reliant. I don't ask anybody for anything.
Right.
To quote Simon and
Not even on the
Garfunkel,
grid. I'm not
I am
even
a
on a
rock.
grid.
Yeah, I'm an island. Like I don't need anyone. And I remember growing up, I had a friend whose dad was old school and he worked in an auto parts at a car dealership. And when his teeth would rot, he would go in the garage and pull them out himself with pliers.
Oh,
And my dad was the dentist. So it
oh,
wasn't like it was someone he didn't know. But that's like the epitome of, 100% self-reliant. So it can
right.
get to this point of it's unhealthy. And so,
Mm,
just to look at where am I on this spectrum and where's the healthier place for me to be, I would
right.
say, I don't know, 6 or 7, so I give myself permission to ask for help when I need it, when I've got a
Mm,
broken bone, when I need to go to the doctor, when I'm depressed or anxious or overwhelmed. Like that's healthy.
mm,
And the other one that I have a big problem with is the be stoic or don't feel.
right.
Because
Like, don't show emotions or
I think
don't
it's
feel it
don't
or
show
both.
emotions for sure, but it's also don't feel
Don't
them
feel it. Yeah.
at a deeper level. And so we shame ourselves when we do.
Mm,
And I have a real problem with this one because we are human before we are male, I would argue.
Mm.
And this traditional masculinity, I would argue, cuts us off from huge aspects of our humanity.
Mm.
And then we're becoming performative. We're performing at being masculine in order to play the
Oh.
game. There's a great quote by R.D. Laing, I think it was a psychotherapist, psychiatrist back in like the 40s.
Hmm.
And he had this book called Knots, and there's a book of poems about psychology. And one of them is, um, I'm playing a game. I'm playing a game of not playing a game. If I tell them that I'm playing a game, they will get mad at me. So if I
Mm.
call out the game, they get pissed.
Mm.
And that's true with this dynamic, right? So if we look at, the emotional spectrum,
Mhm.
if you think of growing up, middle school, high school, and if you show too much sadness or fear as a young man publicly in front of others, inevitably at some point you will get one of the three following insults. And I apologize for the swearing, the slurs, but I think it's also important to talk about so we can be aware of it.
Mhm.
So the insults that we get are stop being a pussy, don't
Mm.
be a little bitch, or
Mm.
don't be a little girl.
Right.
And those all are the epitome of the feminine. So the message on that
Mm.
side of the emotional spectrum is don't be feminine.
Ah.
And I don't think it takes getting those messages that many times. I've thought about this, maybe 4 or 5,
Mm.
maybe some more for some, less for others.
Mm.
But we get that, we're like, "Shit, I'm never showing that again.
Yeah,
That
because
hurts. That's
I'm getting
humiliating."
punished when I show that.
Plus, I wanna
Yeah.
belong,
Yeah.
right? I wanna belong in my friends with my male friends. And so we jump back in the man box and we shut that side down. And then on
Mm.
the positive side of the spectrum, if you show too much joy, love, excitement, romanticism, flamboyance, it's, "Dude, don't be so gay or don't be a fag." So the message there is don't be homosexual.
Mm.
And one of the things they say about the masculine identity is that it's a
Mm.
negative identity. It does a better job telling us what not to do than what to do. Doesn't really tell us what
Right.
to do very well. But, so then we jump back in the man box, and then what emotions are available to us that we can publicly display without fear of humiliation? I would say
Mm.
it's, about 3 things. I'm sure there's others, but these are kind of the main ones.
Mhm.
So the first one is lust,
Mm.
because if I tell you, "Oh my god, look at that ass, she's so fine, I'd do her."
Mm.
It signals I'm straight, so that's safe.
Ah.
The second one is stress,
Mm.
because if I tell you, Kasim, "Man, I am so stressed," it implies I'm busy or important or I matter.
Right, you got things happening in life.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm a successful man.
Yeah, yeah.
And the third one, I would say the biggest one is anger. Some degree of anger, frustration,
Mm.
annoyance, irritation, anger, all the way up to rage.
Mm.
And I would argue that the majority of our emotions get funneled through that anger lens. We talked about what's underneath anger earlier.
Mhm.
And it's everything from depression to anxiety to guilt to shame to embarrassment to sadness to hurt
Mm.
feelings. And then we get into a relationship, and Jory and I have been doing a lot of couples work lately, and the
Mhm.
biggest complaint we hear from wives is I can't connect with my husband. Well, yeah, like that makes complete sense to me
Mm.
because of how we're socialized. And here's the thing I love about this idea. It's not our fault.
Right.
Any man listening, it's not your fault. You did
Mhm.
not ask to be socialized like this. It just happens.
Mm.
And I think it's society's way of creating soldiers or young men that are brave, willing to fight to protect country. And, I'm all for support of our armed forces.
Mhm.
And I think we need some awareness of why it's happening, where it's happening, how it's happening, so that we have a choice.
Mm.
Because there is research that shows that this happens in most countries around the world. Where it doesn't happen is in certain Pacific Island cultures where there's no neighboring country at threat of invading and taking resources. So they don't need the same kind of masculinity to develop, and their
Mm.
masculinity can differ there.
Mm.
So that tells me that this is socially constructed. But there's no one behind it. There's not a, Illuminati conspiracy
Right,
theory
just
behind
created
this.
it, right? It's just
It just
yeah.
is.
So you're really reconstructing masculinity or
Yeah.
redefining masculinity. So how do we redefine it? So here's some of the social ways we've learned and was constructed in terms of how we are as men, and what does it mean to be a man, and a strong man with no emotions. And so what's a healthier way to redefine
Well, it's a great question.
masculinity?
I mean, I think that the first order of business is to increase self-awareness.
Mm,
And I mean, Tasha Eurich has some good research that shows that 95% of us will report being highly self-aware. And her research shows it's about 12 to 15% of us in actuality. That's a huge problem. And I think it's a problem of just humanity being human, right? We are just not that aware of how we feel, what we think, our behavior, our impact on others, and so on. And so we got to work to become more self-aware. And you know, your area of specialty is mindfulness, and I think that's
hmm
the foundational step. I think that we've got to begin to give ourselves permission to feel whatever it is we're feeling, and work to give ourselves a greater pause between the emotion and how we behave as a
mm,
result of that feeling. I think we need greater awareness of the moods that we're in, and I make a distinction between emotions and moods, where
hmm
emotions typically have a cause and they're time limited, so they're short in duration.
hmm
So they're generally last about 3 minutes. I mean, you can go a little bit more, a little bit less, but just on average. And a mood, I would say, doesn't necessarily have a cause.
hmm
Some days we wake up on the right side of the bed. Some days it's the wrong side of the bed. Some
hmm
days I wake up grouchy. Other days I let her sleep. Sorry, that's a really bad Seven Dwarfs joke. Um, some days I wake up irritable. Some days I'm tired. And, you know, to give yourself permission to be in a lousy mood, to be grouchy, to be tired, to be depressed,
Mm,
and to tell your partner, hey, honey, I just want to let you know, I realize I'm in kind of a grouchy mood today, and
mm.
it's got nothing to do with you, assuming that's true.
Ah,
That is such a gift to tell the people around you that you love, because otherwise what we do is we take other people's emotions and moods personally without
right.
much
What did I do
awareness.
wrong?
Yeah, what did
Yeah.
I do to piss him off? Why is he acting like
Yeah.
such a jerk to me? So if you can tell them up front,
Mm,
I'm just kind of struggling today, but it's not personal, it's just a mood.
mm,
It's a huge gift, because then they have the choice of, they can support you, they can try and help you out, or they can just give you space. Either one's fine. Because one of the things also I think we have to work on is this skill of depersonalization. So
mm.
depersonalizing how other people feel, act, behave.
Right.
And I remember I was in graduate school at Cal, and I had a situation where a person I was consulting with for school was snarky and kind of mean to me. And
Mm.
I was like in my early 20s, and they were like in their 40s. And I'm sure they're thinking, what the hell does this kid know? Which, was pretty valid. But they were just mean about it. And I remember going back to my teacher, Meiji Singh, who was like a blessing of a man. Um, and he said, John, we make the mistake of taking 95% of what other people say, do, and feel personally, when in
Mm.
fact it's about 5%. And he would always say stuff like that, where you kind of go away and you think about it for like 5 years. Like, like, wow, where did that come from?
Uh,
And so I like to share the idea of playing the depersonalization game of,
mm,
and I think the easiest example is, let's say you get into an Uber or a Lyft, right?
mm.
And the driver's noticeably irritated. And you're like, the initial thought's going to come, right? What did I do to this fool to piss him off? Like, why is
Yeah.
he nasty to me? So that's going to come, mindfulness. You can't stop the thoughts from coming. You can change
Right.
how you relate to them. And so then you kind of kick the game into gear. Like, what other interpretations
Yeah.
can I come up with that might explain this guy's behavior or mood in a manner that has nothing to do with me? Let's see. Got a ticket, got a flat tire, got in a fight with his wife, has a teenage son on drugs, is worried about taxi cab competition. Like, there's so many other explanations I can come up with to explain his mood that
Mm,
aren't personal. And as you do that, it's super helpful.
mm. It's very freeing, because otherwise we're taking on everything. Everything
Yeah.
relates around, centers around me, me, me.
Yeah.
What
Well,
did I?
and that, I mean, so the majority of us are actually still egocentric.
Yeah.
And we do think me, 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 and we do think the world revolves around us. We never evolved out of that stage of development as an adolescent,
Mm.
which is frightening.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we're not taught these things. Like
Right.
this is not something that should be really taught in school, but we're
Yeah,
not taught these
absolutely.
things, or yeah, even emotions, how to learn about emotions, how to normalize, how what does it mean to feel things. Yeah. So what else in terms of redefining masculinity? So you really laid out a couple of things, like
Oh,
connecting.
yeah, I think some of the positives of masculinity are the provider, being the provider for the
Mm,
family. Although, that's it's evolving because
mm,
more and more women are in the workforce, and there's more women that have graduated from college than men now. More women
mhm,
are climbing the corporate ladder. And so I think that often is a hit to us if our wife, for example, is earning more than us, or if our wife's employed and we're not. That's
mhm,
problematic. And so to kind of get used to the idea or revise the idea of what it means to be a provider, like
mm,
I stayed home for a couple of years when I was in graduate school to watch our kids who were infants.
mm.
And I think that was a great experience. It was hard as hell.
Yeah.
And it made me appreciate others who do it. So it gave me greater perspective. I think I love, men's sense of humor. I think that's a big plus.
Mm.
I think that, the dad jokes where you groan and like, oh,
Mhm,
geez, it's the eye roller. And yet I try and joke around a lot with my family. And a lot of times I get that. They're like, oh, geez. Or, Jory just won't respond at all, just stone
mhm.
face because it's bad.
Yeah.
I used to
Crickets in the
say,
background.
yeah, oh, it's like, yeah, I get that. That was shit. Um, but I will also say that, look, I would rather make the attempt at making others around me laugh or smile than not, which
Mm,
means that there are going to be times when I make an attempt and it just sucks. It's
yeah.
bad. And that's okay. I'm willing to fall on my face for the
Yeah.
possibility in the future that I make you smile or laugh and take some of that stress off your plate.
Mm. See, that takes away a lot of perfectionism. Like, I have to get it right, or I'm not even going to try. If I'm not guaranteed 100% success, I'm not going to even attempt something.
Well, there's another piece here of embarrassment, right? Which is,
Mm.
because what's underneath the perfectionism, and there's a few different things that can be there. But I used to ask men, how comfortable are you with being embarrassed?
Mhm.
And they're like, zero, not at all. I hate it. I'd rather die. And it was universal.
Mm.
And I would just ask them why.
Mm.
Like, why is it such a problem for you to be embarrassed?
Hmm.
And I let them sit with that. And then I say, look, embarrassment is an emotion. It lasts
Mm.
about 30 seconds to a couple minutes. Our cheeks get red and flushed after
Mhm.
we've broken some social rule or expectation, like slip on a banana peel, fall on your ass, for example.
Yeah.
Other people might laugh and then it goes away. And
Mm.
oh, the other part of embarrassment is it makes you want to get the heck out of the situation, right? Um, but that's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
And so once I realized this years ago, because I remember I was thinking about the class clowns in my high school class and
Mhm.
how could they consistently make people laugh? And I realized they didn't care about being embarrassed. They were willing
Yeah.
to embarrass themselves to get a laugh. And so that was kind of what started me down this path. And I think it's a really good practice for us to all play around with embarrassing ourselves.
Mm.
And it's funny, my daughter, she's now 19 at UC Santa Cruz, and she's amazing. I used to embarrass her all the time. And she at first she just hated
Yeah,
it.
I was gonna say, I'm
And
sure
she's
she
like,
really
"Dad."
appreciated that.
And over time, and I said, "You understand why I'm doing this, right? I'm not doing this just for the sake of embarrassing you.
Mm.
I'm doing this to get you comfortable with being embarrassed
Mm.
so that you care less about what other people think
Right.
about you. Because I don't want you to live your life 100% concerned and fretting
Mm.
about people thinking about you negatively. That's going to happen for a variety of reasons."
Of course.
And she developed into this wonderful young lady. Um, and she doesn't take herself too seriously. She's beautiful. She's smart. She
Mm.
can make fun of herself. Um, she's amazing.
Mm. Well, she sure has an amazing father.
Well, thank you.
Yes, you really live the work that you teach, and this is actually the hardest thing, because it's can sound like pie in the sky, like, oh, all of these things we can, but actually you've gone through stuff, you've lived through stuff,
Mm.
you've felt things, you've had tragedies, and I really appreciate this incredible work that you do, and really serve so many people, and this continual interest in evolving as a human being. And I've so enjoyed this conversation. Actually, I feel like we can like go a couple more hours, but I know we
Yeah.
have to come to an end. So I'm wondering. I just have one more question, and I'm curious about where people can find you. But um, the name of this podcast is Pause to Elevate, and I'm wondering, what does pause to elevate mean to you? What does pausing or elevating mean to you?
Pause to elevate means respond instead of react. It means
Mm,
increasing the length of time, the gap between stimulus and response,
mm,
so that you have time to take a breath and consider, based on what I'm feeling, what are my best options in terms of how I respond. So
mm,
it's mindfully responding rather than just emotionally reacting.
mm. If we had more of that in the world, this would be a different world. Not to
Yeah.
be hijacked
And
by, yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but to your point of, serving others, I remember I've done 3 interviews on my podcast with world-class experts on meaning and purpose and values.
Mm,
It's an area which really interests me. And I asked them all the same question, that, if you're aiming for a happier life, a more satisfying life, is there a better value to pursue than serving others?
mm,
And every one of them said no. And most of what we pursue, I would argue, is wealth, power, and fame in our
mm,
culture. But interestingly, I don't think that leads to a happier, more
mm.
satisfying life.
It's
I think
never
it's
enough,
misguided. No, and you're always comparing yourself to people who have more.
which is always a disappointment,
Hmm.
right? Yeah. Well, thank you for your incredible love and service to so many. And I'm wondering, I've mentioned when we began the podcast all the different ways in your websites, but what's the best way for people to reach you? And I'll put that all of that in the show notes.
Yeah, thank you. I think that guidetoself.com is probably the
Mhm.
best place to reach me. That's where my individual work is. That's where you can get a hold of me. Theevolvedcaveman.com is more about the
Mhm.
podcast, and then the site for Jory and I doing couples work is loveisn'tenough.net.
Mm, excellent. And how about Instagram?
Oh yeah, I think Instagram is the Evolved Caveman.
I love game. Okay, I'll put that as
Unfortunately, my
well.
branding isn't consistent across my
Yeah.
social media platforms because I'm not a huge social media fan. But I
T-
post
uh,
about the podcast and things there.
talk about the emotion of resistance. I had that myself for years, right? I was like, I don't know, I don't, do I want? And then finally, like, believe it or not, it was only last year that I got onto Instagram. I know. I mean, talk
Yeah.
about a caveman. I came out of a cave.
Well, I
So,
mean, Jory and I are just starting. Like, I got to get a branding expert to help with Evolved Caveman.
yeah,
We actually have to put some money behind it now after
yeah, to
five
get it
years of
going.
doing it.
Yeah. Well, this has been such a pleasure, such a joy, truly, and I look forward to actually connecting in person one day. I really do, and
Absolutely. I
just
would
like
love that.
catching up and so much to
Yeah.
talk
Consider
about.
this the
So
start of a friendship.
yes, I really feel that. Like this is it's a treat to talk here in the podcast, and there's more. So thank you so much. And I also want to thank all the listeners for listening. If you found this useful and helpful, please share, send this to a friend or anyone who could benefit from this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. It can really help me continue sharing this work. May your moments be filled with ease, and may you be present in as many of them. Thank you. Hello there, and thank you so much for stopping by this channel. I hope you find this content useful, and if you do, feel free to hit that subscribe button. It will really help me to reach to more people and keep this content going. Here we are journeying together, and let's see where this takes us.